Hi everyone, and welcome to one more episode of the Allplane Podcast, where we talk with the movers and shakers that are redefining the future of commercial aviation. As usual, before we start, I would like to remind you that all previous episodes of this podcast, as well as many other aviation stories, are available on the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv. Allplane.tv. And by the way, you can also subscribe to the newsletter where I collect stories from the sustainable aviation world, from innovation in aviation and the broader aviation industry. And I send it out about once a week, sometimes a bit longer, but it's usually once a week. And now to today's episode. Our guest today is Mukul Hariharan, managing partner of the United Airlines Ventures Sustainable Flight Fund. The Sustainable Flight Fund was set up in 2023 by United Airlines Ventures, which is the venture capital arm of the eponymous airline, and the mandate was clear: to invest in technologies that will lead the aviation industry on the path to sustainability. United Airlines initially allocated $100 million to this fund, but this soon doubled to $200 million, and then it grew again to $228 million. The fund, by the way, is currently closed. Another remarkable thing about it is that a number of very prominent companies from across the aerospace ecosystem and beyond have joined as partners and co-investors. I'm talking about companies like Boeing, Embraer, JetBlue Ventures, which, by the way, we had here also on this podcast in the past, Google, Honeywell, airlines like Air New Zealand and Hawaiian Airlines, and also companies from outside the industry like the Boston Consulting Group, American Express. I won't be reading the whole list now, but you get an idea of the caliber of these partners. This is not the first time we talk about venture investment in aviation here on this podcast. Neither is it going to be the last time. But one thing that got me really intrigued, particularly about this fund, is the success of United Airlines in assembling this truly amazing coalition of A-list companies and to get them to support this initiative. So I wanted to learn a bit more about this fund. Today, on this episode of the podcast, I won't miss a chance to ask Mukul about the fund's inception, its investment philosophy, and the sort of investments it has made in the relatively short period of time in which the fund has been operating. By the way, Mukul is an excellent conversationalist, and he articulates very clearly his mission at the front of what is essentially the world's largest venture fund specializing in sustainable aviation. But perhaps it's best if I shut up now, and without further ado, I welcome Mukul to the podcast. Hi, Mukul. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a very complicated morning everywhere in the world because of a massive IT outage, but we managed to get online, and here we are to talk about the very interesting job you guys do investing in the future of aviation. But first of all, like every other guest, I just want to ask you to share a few words about who you are and your background, because I've seen you have been a pilot, a commercial pilot, actually, working for airlines, not just a general aviation pilot, and in finance, of course. And now you are managing a very interesting project that is led by United Airlines, but has a number of very prominent partners from across the industry, the Sustainable Flight Fund. We're going to talk about this in a second, but first of all, please tell us a bit more about yourself before we start.
Well, first of all, Mukul, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on and talk about what we're doing. I manage the Sustainable Flight Fund, as you mentioned. I started here about a year ago at the fund's inception, which was in February of 2023. So we've been up and running for about 16 months. My background is, as you mentioned, a combination of energy and aviation, which makes this role for me a nice nexus of my career arc. The predominant portion of my career has been in energy, so 16 years roughly in what I'll call energy finance, so 10 years in investment banking, 6 years at a hedge fund, covering oil and gas and power, so traditional energy in both of those roles. In investment banking, I was sort of capital markets and M&A, or usual investment banking activities. And at the hedge fund I covered distressed credit, special situations, equities. I sort of did everything. So it was a good kind of well-rounded balance of finance perspectives. And then my first career, as you mentioned, I was a commercial airline pilot. I spent 2 years flying Dash 8s at Aloha Island Air, which was Aloha's regional airline at the time, and
In
Piedmont
Hawaii. In
in
Hawaii.
Hawaii. That's
Yeah.
right. I was doing inter-island flights in Hawaii, and then Piedmont Airlines, where I was based out of LaGuardia, actually, New York, and flying Dash 8s again, so the de Havilland Dash 8. And then I spent a couple of years flight instructing before that. And I actually have my undergraduate degree is in aerospace engineering. So, again, the aviation and energy context is something that's interesting to me. And like I said, this has been a nice melange of those two ideas. I said the fund, like I said, I started here a year ago. When the fund started, when I first learned about it, I thought it was a really exciting and interesting idea. First and foremost, I think it sort of, if I take a step back now, having been at United for a year, I think it kind of demonstrated where United's vision is in this whole decarbonization initiative that we're all sort of going after. And two respects, I think, and where the fund sort of is emblematic of that. One, it's sort of holistic in nature, right? So that to me is sort of Scott Kirby and United's acceptance and acknowledgement of, one, the issue of decarbonization, and two, where United fits in that issue, right? Which I think is unique in the industry and honestly in the broader economic perspective as well. The fund has, as you mentioned, a series of partners, limited partners in the fund. We started out with 5: Boeing, GE, Honeywell, JP Morgan, and Air Canada. So those were the anchor investors. We've since added another 16 to get to 21 total, 22 including United. And those run the gamut of industry partners. So additional airlines in JetBlue, Air New Zealand, and Hawaiian, but also additional financial partners, Bank of America and American Express, energy partners, Technip and Aramco Ventures, and then some other aviation folks, including Embraer as another OEM that to go along with Boeing, who is an anchor as well. So again, a very well-rounded limited partner base, which I think is representative again of the initiative that we're after is focused in the immediate on aviation and decarbonization of aviation. But at the end of the day, and this is a core tenet I'll get to of the fund, this is really an energy transition issue that's going to be spurred by the reconfiguration of infrastructure of energy, really. And so it really involves all products, all consumer products, all portions of the economy. And again, I think our LP base is representative of that. We did our third close earlier this year, so we did 3 closes. We ended up with $228 million of capital, which is not an insignificant sum for energy venture capital. So
I wanted to ask you about this because I think my understanding is that the initial sum was about 100 million, yeah, and then it got doubled to 200.
That's right.
You are now at 228 already. So
that's right.
Okay.
So 228, and that's the final number. So the fund is officially closed for this first fund.
Okay.
We have about 160 million in dry capital. So we've made 11 investments to date, spanning about 70 million of money put to work. So we have quite a bit of money to continue to put to work over the next 5 years in a slew of opportunities, which I can get to what we're looking at. But like I said, $230 million fund. The fund. The broad focus is venture capital and technology focus to facilitate decarbonization of aviation. And the most obvious mechanism to do that is sustainable aviation fuel being, maybe the singular largest component of aviation emissions, not the only one, right? There's other avenues to do so, but fuel being the primary one. So that's been our focus. And within that focus, we have as I said earlier, a very a comprehensive and broad perspective on how to approach that, and that involves all nodes of the energy supply chain. But we invest primarily in early stage technologies. So,
how you define early stage? At what?
That's right. So I was just about to do that because it's an ambiguous term in a lot of ways, but we have a fair amount of flexibility. We've done everything from seed investments, so small $1 million investments, to later stage, call it Series C or D, so the third and fourth round of capital raising for a specific company. Our sweet spot has tended to be sort of in the Series A range. So once a company has raised a nominal sum of money and then is looking to take the next sort of R&D step, that's generally where the Series A has sat. So that's kind of the bulk of where our portfolio sits, but we really do have the flexibility to kind of invest anywhere within that continuum. I'll also add that we do have the flexibility to invest at the asset level. So what that means is we can invest in projects if we think the returns make sense. So again, that gives us the flexibility that other funds, quite frankly, in the space don't have, right? Generally, funds are either only technology focused or only infrastructure focused. Our fund is unique, I think, in the sense of as a financial fund that it has the ability to do both by mandate because our mandate is sufficiently broad and comprehensive to where we can do that.
Yeah, when you mentioned the mandate, I wanted to ask you about this, but you kind of answered the question already. You mentioned that the SAF is the primary focus, but from your words, if I understand correctly, you leave enough ambiguity there so that you might invest in other types of products as well that fall
That's right.
between that
That's right.
broad decarbonization of aviation mandate. Yeah.
That's right. And I think the way we think about that, and kind of harken back to the background I mentioned for my background, and Andrew Chang, who heads up United Airlines Ventures, similar background. We're both Houston-based. We're energy folks in our professional careers. We think of this in an energy context, and in that context, sustainable aviation fuel is a molecule, right? It's a fuel molecule that sits at one node of a very broad and complex supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
And so distinguishing between a molecule and a supply chain is often just it's an exercise in ambiguity in a lot of ways. So as an example, we think of how do we get to a SAF molecule? There's multiple pathways, and within those pathways, there's multiple technology nodes that can effectuate it. So, as an example, in power to liquids, you need hydrogen from either electrolyzers, or we have a natural hydrogen company we're invested in, Coloma, which can do the same thing. You need to capture carbon. You need a conversion technology that takes carbon dioxide and hydrogen and turns it into syngas. You need syngas to upgrade it into fuel. So you have all these various components, not to mention at the very start, core energy, right? Renewable energy in the case of wanting green energy that kind of underpins every technology. But even if we go a little broader and conceptually broader, that alcohol to jet is a pathway that we think has promise and is technologically fairly mature. Taking ethanol as an example and upgrading it into jet fuel. Well, ethanol today goes into the gasoline market effectively to fuel cars. Electrification of the grid and cars expands supply that would otherwise not be available for biofuels. So everything is integrated in our mind. And again, I think that's something that really sets us apart in our approach, but also in our ability to make good investments. And I think that's another tenet I wanted to come to, that we don't think there's really a difference between making good investments and doing strategic good, if you will, right? The two they're inherently linked. And so our approach is broadly from a strategic objective, but the mechanism, the means through which we're doing that is by making good investments, financially sound investments. And so having that broader approach allows us to pick and choose the right places and to find good companies that are going to that are going to accelerate things along the path that we want them to go.
Mm-hmm. From your words, I imagine you are kind of technology agnostic, or is there a specific pathway that you are particularly interested in when it comes to SAF?
I think we're agnostic in the sense of what makes the most sense. Again, I think the benefit of viewing things holistically is that you see that there's multiple ways to get to the same point. So you don't fixate on any given pathway or technology, because the reality is that there's multiple technologies and the permutations of those technologies that can make the ultimate molecule that you need. Incidentally, if we broaden decarbonization of aviation, it doesn't just have to be sustainable aviation fuel, right? Aviation fuel is the most obvious one because of logistics constraints with airplanes. But maybe short haul, there's electrification. United Airlines Ventures is invested in a few OEM technologies that are doing that. There's the potential for hydrogen, which confers some technology risk and cost considerations, but that's a possibility. So there's all sorts of other things that you do. And again, that's to highlight the fact that we don't focus either in the fund or in United Airlines Ventures broadly on any given path. We're really agnostic to the best way to get there, and that's what we try to find. And that's what the flexibility of our mandate, both in the fund and in United Airlines Ventures allows us to do.
Yeah, actually, one of the things that really stand out as well is you have this large coalition of partners, including some companies that have their own investment or venture funds. Is it because they identified you as, let's say, a particularly skillful operator? I mean, the fund, you are, of course, as well, but as a managing partner. But if they have identified the Sustainable Flight Fund as a particularly skillful operator when it comes to identifying these opportunities in this sector.
Yeah.
Because I think that's kind of unusual, no? I mean, you have all these very, like companies that in some cases are even competitors that are getting on board.
Agreed. I think there's two elements to it. The first one I think is it's a testament to all our partners' willingness to partner, right? And viewing this as a challenge that needs to be tackled holistically and collaboratively, right? And not individually. So I think that's leaving aside the commentary on what it says for the fund and its investing prowess. I think that first starting point is really, really important. It's really a testament to everybody's acknowledgement of the challenge and how coming together is better than doing it individually. As it relates to the fund, I think where we sit in the supply chain, being obviously very, very closely affiliated. United is our biggest LP, and we consider ourselves part of United in that sense. We sit at a part of the supply chain where we see everything. So that's in contrast to someone, a company that maybe sits upstream in the supply chain and their particular investments or technology proliferation they see might be a little more localized. We sit at the end, and so we can sort of see everything. And then I think the other one is, and this I think this was clearly the vision of Scott and Mike Leskinen, who's now the CFO of United, and how to form the team is to create a team that has a non-airline sort of energy background, right? So thinking of things and attacking the problem from a perspective of where the root of the issue is, which is, again, energy transition and energy proliferation, right? 90% of carbon dioxide emissions come from energy use from fossil fuels, right? So that is the place to tackle. And so folks that understand that space, understand the financing of that space as well, right? Not just the technical understandings of it, is really what you need to be able to tackle the issue. And I think that's what we distinguish ourselves, in my opinion, from other funds and other corporate venture capital funds as well, right? We're sort of subject matter experts in energy and energy transition and energy finance first, and then as it applies to airlines versus in many cases the other way around.
Mm-hmm. On your website, you mention as well contributions from customers. How does this work? Is it like individual passengers that are just giving you checks to invest, or how can people be part of this?
We have this option. I believe it's in ticketing that customers can contribute to the fund, and they're not limited partners, so the economics don't flow. So it is a contribution. But again, I think it's representative of the vision, right? Like collective, the idea that everybody can be sort of part of this, and the fund represents the vehicle to do that, right? So I think it's, again, a really, really cool way to augment and also bring attention to what we're doing. And I think it's done that clearly with customer contributions.
Okay. Is that still an option? Because you mentioned that you had closed the fund. Can people contribute?
I don't know the exact answer. I believe it is. I believe it is.
Okay.
You should check on that though.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned as well you're under the umbrella of United Airlines Ventures, which is also part of United Airlines, the airline that everyone knows about. What's the structure like? I mean, I'm assuming that the fund is like, let's say, the largest unit or the largest venture of, inside United Airlines Ventures. But what other things does United Airlines Ventures do aside from the fund?
So United Airlines Ventures, so United was the original corporate CVC that kind of started all this. And broadly speaking, United Airlines Ventures is bucketed into three buckets, or was really, and I'll get to the why the was is in a second. One is just what you would consider to be traditional aerospace technology. So that could be everything from engine propulsion OEMs and technology to actual aircraft technologies, eVTOL being a technology that United is big into. So things that you would just consider to be aerospace technologies. The other one is customer experience and general technology. So Clear is the most shining example of investment that United Airlines Ventures made several years ago when it was an early stage company and kind of blew up after that, blew meaning in popularity. And so that was a very profitable investment the United Airlines Ventures made and kind of showed the vision of where they see technology. So technology is the other one, customer experience, things of that nature. And then the third one was sort of sustainability as it relates primarily to fuel. And that's sort of the function that was spun out, if you will, into the Sustainable Flight Fund and brought in new investors and new LPs into the fund. So where it sits today is that the fund is primarily focused on what I'll call fuel-related emissions and ways to tackle those emissions. And then everything else that even things that might relate to decarbonization sit at United Airlines Ventures. So, as an example, if you have an airplane that one of United's broader goals and the industry's broader goals and a way to decarbonize is more through more efficient airplanes, airframes, engines, those technologies and investments would sit at United Airlines Ventures. Everything that's sort of fuel related, SAF related, including hydrogen and things of that nature would sit at the fund. And then, the technology stuff again sits clearly at the fund. And to your point, you had it exactly right that United Airlines Ventures is an investor in the Sustainable Flight Fund. So it's an LP and the GP, and the biggest LP in the fund. And also that holding is largely the biggest holding that United Airlines Ventures has as well.
Just to wrap it up, because I know we're a bit short of time today, unfortunately, because it's a very interesting conversation. I just wanted to ask you about your view, a more of a macro view of where the SAF market is going, because there's a lot of talk about the different approaches in more incentive-based in the US, more mandate-based in Europe. And it seems that there are lots of projects that they're still kind of small scale, but looking at it from outside, I don't know, I got this impression that, okay, so at least in parts of the world, in theory, you have a certain amount of demand that is kind of assured, unless there's a major political change, but there's a huge gap with the current supply. Shouldn't many more investors be flocking into this sector right now? Because it looks like a safe bet to invest in more capacity, but maybe I'm missing something here.
No, I think your assessment is largely correct in the state of affairs. I think the where we sit is in SAF is probably largely where we sit in energy transition broadly. That there's some measure of technologies exist. Some are more proven than others, but largely the technologies exist. They just cost a lot of money. The infrastructure costs of the energy transition is very, very high. And that creates kind of two things. One, it just creates general stasis and friction to getting things started. And two, it's jurisdictionally dependent too, probably, right? So that's sort of where we probably sit in the continuum of things are slower potentially than people would have thought given those facts, but I don't think that's anomalistic or unusual in something that's going to be an undertaking as it is today. They're different dynamics, obviously, but if you look at a lot of the current energy transition dynamics, whether it's wind and solar, there's these long periods of sort of flatness, and then capacity is sort of built and it feeds on itself and it's pro-cyclical, and you sort of get this expansion of capacity all at once from seemingly nowhere, but the underlying dynamics were sort of all in place. So I think that's largely the cadence that the broader energy transition and SAF sitting within that transition will take. There's a series of things that have to happen. Mandates and things that you mentioned are kind of the backbone and need to sit as the base of everything. But ultimately, there needs to be more willingness for customers to accept the cost, for companies, broadly speaking, to share in their risk allocation of those costs, and then for capital to come in. And I think that's a process. And the process is going to, like all things, take a while, but we think eventually it will happen. And that's kind of what the premise of the fund is, right? To invest ahead of that and to help catalyze that so that when more capital comes in, all of this stuff can proliferate.
So if there is a SaaS entrepreneur out there that wishes to pitch to your fund, where should they go? Is there an established process to do that? Are there channels where people can learn more about how you guys work and send their pitches to see if whether they are investable or not?
Well, we are always open to hearing from companies. We like to talk to everybody, and we love to hear ideas. And I think there's a mutual benefit no matter what the outcome is in us learning more and understanding. So we're always open to folks reaching out to us. we have a website right now. We're working on a new one that should be out a little later this year that will provide a forum for folks to come in. But we have one today where people can reach out. And in terms of technology or business plan, we're also very open and agnostic. With the slight caveat that we want business plans that make sense because the technology has to be part of a company that is a viable company in order for that technology to ultimately be part of the broader solution. So under those two broad rubrics, under that criteria, I think we're willing and want to talk to everybody that's out there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for making time today to explain this very interesting fund that you're managing, and hopefully we'll see a lot more stuff coming on stream in the next few years. Prices going down as well, so fostering adoption, and hopefully some people will also make some money out of it, like like your fund. Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. If you like this podcast, you can support us by giving it a great rating on Apple, Spotify, or whichever platform you get it from. And remember, you can of course subscribe to it. And you can also get regular updates through the Allplane website. That's Allplane.tv. We have a newsletter where we cover the aviation industry every week with a special focus on innovation and sustainability. So give it a go. Thank you and goodbye.